and just waving. I'd love to just get a sense of who you are and where you are. You know, sometimes it feels these days, you know, I see someone's in paradise there in Mauritius. That's George. How's it, George?
Yeah, I'm just going back to my hotel room after this. Eh?
Under the palm tree there. That's your hotel. Wonderful, man. Thanks, George. It's lovely to just get a sense of who's on the call. If anyone else is willing, I'd love to just see you. Otherwise, please, in the chat pane, please just say hello in the chat pane. Let us know where you're coming in from. Akona, lovely to see you. And Akona is looking like a pilot there with those. Yes, I need one of those, Akona. I work in an open plan office. And yes, to have comfortable headphones, it's just the best thing, hey?
Yeah,
fantastic,
absolutely.
Man.
Great. I think, Mark, you are already connected with the colleagues, but just a way of introduction. Mark is the CEO of Micro, and he is the engine behind the Micro. I've never seen a psychologist who becomes so technocraft with these things. You'll tell us the story how it happened, Mark, in a way of introducing yourself. But also let me say that I'm really enjoying the platform, and I hope the colleagues are going to enjoy the 1 month trial free of charge that you and we have spoken about. But over to you, Mark, and as they're introducing themselves in the chat box, you can also take over, introduce yourself and Mark, Micro, and let's have fun.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. So Sam, let me just do a time check, and you can just give me a thumbs up that we've got through until about 3 o'clock together. Is that right?
Yeah, okay. And as I said, if people are really comfortable, then those who want to leave can leave. If those who want to stay a little bit longer, they can, but we'll check the mood.
Perfect. Let me just check. Are you guys able to see my screen here? You should see it says Micro, your talent just better. Can I get a thumbs up, Sam? Are you seeing that at the moment?
We can see it, but you are not yet sharing. I mean, you haven't.
Okay, I'll share now. I'll share now. Okay, there we go. And Rapula, thanks for just introducing yourself on the chat pane here. Brits in the Northwest. Wow, all the way from Brits. Isn't this this technology brilliant that we can just be talking from all over the place? Randburg. I usually try not to have conversations with people from Randburg. I'll be honest, Akona. It's just a joke because my mom was from Randburg. My mom grew up in Randburg. Okay, guys, let's get started because there's quite a bit that I'd love to share with you. And then I'd love to spend as much time as we can just having a conversation about it. You know that my topic is on emotional intelligence and how it can be useful for you in your current places of work, in entrepreneurship, in leadership, etc. Kinsani, Sesh, Elvis, so great to see you guys. Pretoria, who's there from Pretoria? Oh, that's Kinsani. Man, Sundowns is my soccer team. So it's so great to know that there's some Pretoria signing in from here. I hope you're not a Kaizer Chiefs fan because that'll disappoint me. But anyway, okay, guys, let's jump in. Sam asked me to share a little bit of my background, which I hadn't planned on doing, but I just want to honor him in that. So let me give you a little bit of my background. I am a psychologist, is my training. And they say many times to me, especially in a South African context, that people become psychologists because they need the most help themselves. Is that right, Mark? And that's absolutely true. Of me and my life, because I come from obviously a privileged background, as you can all see in my demographic, but there is an amazing proverb that describes my life, and the proverb goes something like this: it is better to have a dry crust of bread with joy than to have a lavish table with fighting. I think it is a biblical proverb. It's better to have a dry crust of bread with joy than a lavish table with fighting. And if we had time today, I would, Sesh is saying it's to sort out our own demons. If we had more time today, I would love to go into just some of my own story around my childhood family of origin, which was one where there was obviously huge financial privilege, but very low emotional and relational privilege. For example, I never knew my biological dad, which is a very common thing in South Africa. My mom struggled with a psychological disorder that caused her to commit suicide later in her life. And by the time she died, she was onto her third husband. So I had two stepfathers. The middle one that I spent most of my life with was an alcoholic, and there was a huge amount of physical abuse in my life. And why I think it's important to share this is because what it led to in my life was all of the opportunity on the outside. I went to the best schools. In fact, I was in boarding school in Cape Town, a school called Rondebosch Boys. It's almost like a private school. It is a government school, but it's almost like a private school. You know, I had every opportunity available to me, but on the inside of me, I felt worthless because my father never wanted anything to do with me. Because, you know, the stepfathers I had, they were more interested in alcohol than in me. Because my mom ended her own life and, you know, she obviously, you know, chose her own struggles over me, you know. And I'm sure many of you have got similar things that have happened in your life story. Different, Sam, you'll know from all your years of coaching, different practical realities. But because we're all human, we have an internal struggle that at times is far bigger than the external struggle. And what my topic today is really to help you to have a little bit of insight into emotional intelligence, because of what has now become the culmination of my life story. And this is why I think Sam wants me to share it, because as a psychologist, I started doing leadership development and training. And because of my white privilege, I got very quick access into doing leadership development at the age of 23. Now, Sam, you and any of the other more mature leaders should be laughing right now, because no 23-year-old should be doing any leadership development because they have no idea what they're doing. And what it led to was a whole lot of opportunities of working with very senior people where I was just clueless to any of the practical realities about business, but I was not clueless to the emotional and psychological realities of life. And I got exposed from that very young age. I spent about 15 years doing management and leadership development through trying to teach people about emotional intelligence type things. And there was one thing that I learned, and this is what I hope you'll walk away with today. Before I get to any of these slides and any of the psychology and neuroscience that I want to share with you today, I learned one thing from these leaders I had the privilege of working with. And this is it. It doesn't matter what you know about leadership or about emotional intelligence or even about business. It doesn't matter what you know. It matters what you do. The knowing has to translate into the doing. Otherwise, it means nothing. It is valueless. And so I really want to impress that on you today, because what happened to me and what led to me being part of Migro, which is an online emotional intelligence gym, and Comensa is going to be giving away a free month to all of you at the end of this talk. And it's very kind of Comensa and Sam to make that available to you. I think you know that they are partnering with Migro. So you'll be able to go and actually do some of this talk online after the talk. So you also don't need to be too worried about taking too many notes or any of that. I can make all the slides available to you, all of that good stuff. But the thing that I want to impress on you is when I got to round about the age of 30 as a psychologist, I was really struggling internally. I had been successful from a business perspective. I had been successful academically. The knowing doing gap, I love it. Thank you. Who shared that? George. It's Proverbs 17:1. Thank you, George. Guys, please keep the comments going in the chat pane. I love it. The knowing doing gap, exactly. And I had all the knowledge, guys, at the age of 30 because I had a passion for psychology. So I started studying my psych degree at age 20, and I just kept going. So for me, it was 10 years of passionate interest in psychology and reading and deep kind of academics. It culminated in some PhD research that I was doing at the time. And I knew everything there was to know. about, emotional intelligence and the exercises I needed to do to help me with depression and anxiety and even my self-esteem, etc., etc. But on the inside, I was crumbling. I was struggling with depression. I was struggling to keep relationships together. And I was working with an old psychologist at that stage. And he said something to me over lunch at the time. Now, he was about the age gap as the same between me and Sam. So you can make your own mind up as to how big that age gap is. But he was very much like a father figure to me, And he said to me over lunch one day, he said, "You know what, Mark? I can't remember the last time that I had a bad day." And at that stage in my life, I couldn't remember the last time that I'd had a good day. And it made me realize that I was doing something wrong in my life. Something that I was doing in life was wrong. I had all the privilege, but I had none of the joy that I think should. And by the way, for those of you that have spiritual beliefs, I was very theologically tight. Everything was fine upstairs. So I even had that, but I was crumbling on the inside. And he looked at me like only a father can do, Sam. And he said to me something that changed my life and led to Migro. He said, "You know what, Mark? Your problem is you don't practice what you preach. You've got all the knowledge up here, but you don't live it." And what it started for me was a journey out of training and development like we're doing today. Today is a moment of training. I'm going to give you a whole lot of knowledge, a whole lot of insights, but that's not going to change you. And I started seeing that in my own life and in the work I was doing, training and development. We would come back 6 months later, a year later to do follow-ups, or even a week later if it was coaching. And people wouldn't have implemented on a daily basis the techniques we'd spoken about. And so what led to Migro was me trying to say, let's find a way to use technology to help people to implement the techniques that will help them to change the knowledge into action in their lives. And that's what today is going to be all about. I think it's Boniwa just came up on the screen. Boniwa, if you can hear this, would you mind just muting your microphone? I think we can hear you moving a couple of things in the back. So, okay, guys, I think that's enough background from my side. I'm a psychologist. I work as CEO of Migro. It's not a very big company, so it's like calling yourself the CEO of your own bedroom. There are 30 of us in the company. One day, hopefully, I'll be CEO of a big company. And when I present, then you'll pay more attention to what I've got to say. Hey, Mukululi, I know that's going to be the case for you. But for today, I'm just sharing with you from one leader that's trying to get better in his startup business to others who are trying to do well. And let's jump in. I want to share some concepts. And this is what we're going to do. I'm going to share 3 things with you in the time that we have. And then we're going to spend the rest of the time talking together. The one thing I want to share.
You really are privileged, Mark. You're saying you are a small company of 30. Wow.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right.
That's a big company, man.
Yeah, thank you. I heard Melinda Gates talking on a Global Leadership Summit talk. I don't know if any of you have been involved in Global Leadership Summit. And she spoke about the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation being quite a small company. And she said, yeah, we've only got 1,500 employees. So that's where that comment comes from, is I realize that I don't know who the echelons are that I'm talking to. Okay, guys, there's 3 things that I'm going to share, and let me jump in and share those. The one is I would love to share with you a few concepts around why emotional intelligence is important and relevant for you right now in your business role in this time that we find ourselves in the world. The second thing I want to share is some of the neuroscience realities around emotional intelligence. And the third thing I want to share is for us to have a discussion around how powerful emotional intelligence could be for you, either in your own personal role or in your business. So those are the 3 things we're going to cover. And let's jump in. If you've got any questions, by the way, please either just unmute or type them in the chat pane. And maybe you'll trust me to just either answer them in the moment, or we can save them for the discussion at the end. Okay. So I want to start with this concept over here. If we had to look at any of the organizations we're involved in, you could probably plot the problems that we need to unlock to cause more value for that organization as ranging on a spectrum from systemic issues. And Sam, I need your help here. Are you able to see my mouse? Can you see my mouse hovering? Okay. we can plot all the problems we need to unlock, ranging from systemic issues that we face, perhaps in the South African context, and there should be quite a lot of those coming to mind for you, all the way down to problems on the other side of the spectrum with the agents, the individual humans that form part of our organizations. This might be us as individuals, it might be some of our employees, et cetera, et cetera. And usually as leaders in an organization or as entrepreneurs, we want to try and remedy the systemic factors so we can unlock the most amount of value that's restricting us in the organization, right? And we see the government trying to take the same approach. They want to fix the systemic problems. The focus mostly goes on here, right? And I want to put it to you that psychologists have known for a long time where we need to put the focus to create actual change and unlock value. And it's not at the systemic side of the spectrum. And let me illustrate that to you in this research from a guy called Martin Seligman. You might know him as the father of positive psychology. When he was in his younger years, I believe he was in his early 30s, he was doing his research towards a PhD on how people respond to struggle and how people respond to pain. And that was before the days of ethics in psychology. And what he did was he created a double-sided dog kennel. So here's the dog kennel. This is obviously just an abstract picture here. Double-sided dog kennel with a shock plate on the one side and a partition in the middle that could be opened or closed. And what he did was he put the dogs in this side and he would give them a little electric shock. And of course, they would respond, they would behave in a very normal way. They would jump across to the other side and get away from the shock. That's a very normal way of dealing with struggle, right? You get away from things that are painful and difficult and hurtful, okay? Then he closed the partition. In other words, he broke the system. He caused some systemic blockages, okay, for these dogs, and he shocked them again. And when they realized that they were stuck within systemic factors that they couldn't get away from, okay, the system was blocking them, they would just lie in the most comfortable way possible. Okay, again, another normal response. There's nothing rocket science here. This is what you or I would do. This is what we do. This is what we see people doing in their employment. If they're stuck, they can't leave their job or risk unemployment. So they stay in a role where they're uncomfortable. I heard another talk from Steve Jobs at Apple. I'm sure you see every now and then another one of his talks goes around LinkedIn. And he was talking about how you must never do anything that you are not completely passionate about. And everyone goes, yes, I absolutely agree. But what if you're a single parent in South Africa? You can't just leave your job. What if you've invested everything into a startup and it's not yet kind of broken through? You can't just lay that all down and go and do something else you're passionate about. So the systemic factors are real, right? Many of us are just lying there taking the shock, right? What was profound about his research is when he opened up this partition, in other words, he fixed the systemic issues that these dogs were focusing on, and he shocked those same dogs again. Do you know what they did? They carried on lying there, taking the shock. The opportunity was available to them, but psychologically, they had come to think of themselves as being helpless. And this became known as learned helplessness. And learned helplessness is nothing other than a psychological paradigm that keeps us stuck in a way of behaving when there is opportunity available to us to behave in a different kind of way. And learned helplessness, by the way, is a psychological paradigm that is like a low self-esteem, or an external locus of control, or sexism, or racism, or any worldview that has got us so stuck on a current reality that we cannot behave in a different kind of way. I see here, yes, Martin Seligman is also a professor at University of Pennsylvania. Thanks so much for the link in the chat pane. So what I'm trying to illustrate here is that if we want to change either ourselves, or we want to change our businesses, or we want to change the way we lead, what we need to focus on is causing a change in the psychological paradigms that we have. And what is profound for me about this is that psychologists have also found that the set of skills that unlock people's psychology in terms of their paradigms is a set of skills known collectively as emotional intelligence, or EQ. And you can see here, there's some academic models. Some of them you might be familiar with, those of you that have read a little bit about emotional intelligence. All I want to illustrate here is that there is so much research that's been done about emotional intelligence, it would alarm you. But that fundamentally emotional intelligence boils down to a set of over 20 different competencies that make people great at managing themselves and interacting with others. And I see someone in the chat pane earlier, Joseph, he put this, thanks Joe, he put this definition of emotional intelligence, saying emotional intelligence is an ability to understand and manage one's own emotions and those of others, to direct, control, and express feelings in order to make the right decisions. That's one definition. I'd love to know where this comes from, Joe. It looks like a Daniel Goleman definition. He wrote one of the main popular books on emotional intelligence. I think of emotional intelligence simply as this: the ability to use emotional information to manage myself effectively and to interact with others brilliantly. So it's using emotional data, and you can cast your eyes over any one of these competencies and think of the power that it would give you in your job as an entrepreneur or as a leader. Let's just look at assertiveness, for example. We at Migro are in the middle of trying to source some funding, okay? Now, we're a startup organization. Organizations are loving the product that we've built, and we are wanting to scale. But we need funding to scale. And so, I'm needing to be involved at negotiations from venture capitalists. Now, what could it do for me if my assertiveness helped me to not be too strong and so become a little bit arrogant or even negative towards people and push them away, but also not too passive, so that I get bulldozed over in the negotiations by venture capitalists, and we end up selling a portion of Migro for nothing, or we end up getting funding at terrible interest rates, So assertiveness could have a massive role for me there. You could have a look at self-awareness. Guys, we know how tough it is leading people. We constantly are needing to somehow know, how is our behavior as leaders or as employees impacting on others? Well, that self-awareness changes our ability to follow up after meetings where we've made a decision, we see that people are impacted, and we can engage with them in conversations that can keep them motivated rather than causing them to disengage from a new course that we've set in the organization. This is powerful stuff. And we've just looked at two of these things. And so what I want to impress on you from this is that many people, I think, have come to talk about EQ or emotional intelligence. You see it on a list on LinkedIn, of powerful, important skills. And it becomes a thin thing that people talk about in a book somewhere, Are you familiar with this kind of thing? Maybe you can just let me know in the chat pane. This is certainly how I've seen people talk about it. Thanks, George, for saying that's powerful. But as somebody who's lived it, who's lived the reality of feeling worthless and realizing the power, the negative impact of that on my business. Guys, I'll tell you, I got an opportunity to go and work with Renault. And I'm going to share some names, if you don't mind, because I want to make this as real to you as possible. I was 27 years old and I was working with Renault in South Africa, the car company Renault, just to be clear. How much of an opportunity is that for my future? Would we agree? In building a little consulting psychology practice, they wanted me to come in and do some conflict resolution. Guys, it had gone brilliantly well. And 3 months later, the HR manager phoned me, and eventually she said, Mark, the guys are closing off the quarter financially and you still haven't sent me an invoice. Unless you send me that invoice, I'm not going to be able to pay you. And you know what had happened for me over the 3 months? Every time I had come to send that invoice, I was fearful that she was going to come back and question my hourly rate. Because if she questioned my hourly rate, it would be too painful for me in that place of worthlessness that I felt in my father wound, okay, that for her to come back with a question and say, Mark, you're wanting to charge us 15,000 Rand for the day or whatever it was for my facilitation fee. This can't be your hourly rate. You're a psychologist, not a lawyer. the pain would be too much, and I kept procrastinating from sending the invoice. Do you know people do that on sales calls? Do you know that because of painful memories of being rejected, we hesitate to pick up the phone, but what is going to drive your business forward is sales? Do you know, sometimes we forget to ask the question, hey, are you actually going to buy this product because I want to build you into my cash pipeline, and I need to know, are you going to buy this product or not? And what we're doing by actually asking a frank closing question, we get clarity so that we can manage the finances of our business. But when we sit with those stuck paradigms of insecurity, when we have low emotional intelligence, and by the way, right now, I'm speaking to the emotional intelligence component of self-perception. I'm just trying to find it here, but oh, here it is. Sorry, I was looking on the other side. Self-perception is what I'm talking about with learned helplessness. Learned helplessness that I described earlier lies in this domain. And so these things start impacting on the way we live out business. The way we change them, guys, is to rewire some of those neurological pathways in the brain. And I'm going to help you to do that through this giveaway from Kometsa. It's going to help you to do that through an online process. So all I want you to see from this slide is that EQ is not just some fluffy thing that people post on LinkedIn every now and then. It is a powerful part of the way we can live ourselves out as powerful entrepreneurial people or leaders or employees. So bringing it back to this agent system conversation, what if we didn't have to choose anymore between systemic factors that are blocking us or blocking the business and factors that impact on us as individuals? What if we could actually bring these together? And I want to put it to you that if we can change the agents at scale, if we could take each of the people in our organizations and we could simultaneously unlock all of them. That's what at scale means. And maybe some of you, as you were commenting earlier, 30 is a big organization. I agree. It feels very big to me. Maybe you have 3 people in your organization. Maybe you are your organization. So just think of at scale as being whoever you're involved with. If we can unlock the agents, is what changing the agents mean. At scale, we can create the systemic change we need. Because then whoever needs to be picking up the phone will just keep picking it up regardless of the amount of rejection that they face. So what I want to show you is that if we can scale the development of EQ, it starts having, from the top of the organization to the bottom, it starts changing systemic factors like organizational culture. And we can really start bringing together now systemic change and agent change in one place through this technology that Kometsa is going to make available to you through Migraine. You guys will get a trial for that. Now, I want to just put it to you that with some of the clients I'm speaking to at the moment, and guys, forgive me that I bring Sam up as an example quite a lot, but Sam's the only one whose history I know at the moment. But if I think of Sam's work in his coaching, both his work practically and academically, if he were, or if you were to ask either organizations that you're working in, if you're doing consulting work like Sam, or you're running your own organization, what are your main strategic objectives? Many of these words are going to come out, and they are going to come out in terms of your people. These are definitely going to be among your strategic objectives. That you want people to be collaborative. You want a team that's collaborative and respectful, that communicates, and that is able to be innovative and empowered to think well. And as you're building your products, or as you're building your operations and your business intelligence, wherever you are in your organization, these are the kind of things surely that you want. If I just think of this, a culture of learning, this is what clients of mine are saying all the time to me, Mark, we really want to instill a culture of learning. Why do they want that? Because they want people to slowly get better and better and stronger, so that someone that's been employed for 5 years has more muscle in terms of their contribution than they did when they arrived. I mean, that's what we all want. We want that for ourselves, right? But all of these things that I hear from clients around the world in companies that we talk to, this is not just a South African thing. The question that I ask them is that, isn't it interesting that each of these things seems to be the outcome of something else? These are not root factors. To be innovative requires a climate, doesn't it, where people feel psychologically safe. so that they can make suggestions about the direction of a product that seem a little weird, right? That seem a little bit out of sync with what's currently happening. That's what innovation is. It's doing something different to the current. If we want people to be compassionate, what that means is risking that people will share their personal and private struggles. And now suddenly there's not a work-life balance anymore. There's a work-life integration, and that's hard as a leader, isn't it? Because as a leader, you need to get results. And that's much easier if you don't know people's private stories, because you can pretend not to care. You know, ignorance is bliss. And so these things are outcomes. And what's powerful for me is that you can plot these strategic objectives on the different competencies of emotional intelligence. And so right now, wherever you're sitting, whether it is Pretoria or Cape Town or Brakpan or wherever you are signing in from, just have a look at how, if some of your strategic objectives in your business or your values or whatever they are that you want to achieve have got to do with empathy or compassion or respect, they plot onto these competencies of emotional intelligence. The same is true of innovation and collaboration. Guys, if you don't have self-perception, let me tell you a quick story here. Self-perception in terms of innovation, sometimes people say to me, Mark, what do you mean self-perception, the way you view yourself, is important for innovation and collaboration? They say, can you give me an example? Let me give you an example. I was working with an executive team that does Migro. So they're developing their emotional intelligence through Migro. What is this? Sesh is saying 2 things that impact us in Africa with regard to learned helplessness. What are those 2 things, Seth? I think you're busy typing them still. Thanks. Would love to hear about them.
Hi.
Hi, Sesh. Please share with us. Yeah.
Sorry, I don't think I can type fast enough, and I see.
Oh no, go for it. Please share with us.
My spelling is really fraught. Firstly, thank you so much for this, and again, thanks to Sam and the team. But I think what is very relevant to us here in Africa is that you know, this whole model of colonialism was built around learned helplessness and removing that kind of self-worth. You know, it's all the Frantz Fanon sort of reading material. So it's extremely difficult to undo that. Because, you know, it's that whole theory about, you know, to control a people, you control what they believe about themselves. And if you tell people enough that they're worthless over centuries, then that's what becomes internalized. So that's the one thing. But the other is that in organizational cultures, there seems to be a difficulty with respect to tolerance of mistakes. And that's linked to your point about, you know, a learning culture, because you have to have a certain threshold for people to actually innovate and experiment and try things. There needs to be a tolerance up to a certain level for making mistakes. That was it eventually. Thanks.
Seth, you have just set up my point so well. I couldn't agree with you more. What I was going to say about self-perception when people ask me about innovation and collaboration. There was a young lady. She was, I would say, in her late 30s in this EXCO team. So when I say a young lady, I'm saying that on behalf of Sam and you guys in his age group, not on behalf of me. She would sit in this boardroom. She was a wizard in terms of operation. She had grown up in the organization. She was a powerhouse. She was a young Xhosa speaking lady. So I need to give you the demographic if you don't mind. So there was gender aspects happening for her. She was only one of 2 females on that executive team. It was an executive team of 10. It's a insurance, a medical aid company. Okay, you get the picture. Do you know that I would sit with them in the management team meetings, and she would be quiet, like she was a complete introvert or shy, right? Not saying a word. And then in the individual coaching sessions, when I would chat to her, she would come up with ideas, innovative and collaborative ideas that were mind-blowing. And I said to her, why don't you say it in the room? And she said, no, they'll never listen to me. And you know that I had sat with the CEO And I know that the CEO was completely behind her, that he's the one that had pushed her up the rungs. The CEO was behind her. Many other people were behind her, but she was not behind her. And so she had a self-perception that was, I am not good enough, because of whatever her life story was. I know a little bit about that and I can understand it, but she had closed off her voice because of her self-perception. And what unlocked her, Sesh, and what I believe is going to unlock many people in South Africa, many people maybe in this call, it's what has unlocked me, Sesh. When I went from worthless at age 30 to now at age 41, I feel like a very good CEO in the organization that I'm at. And there is no way that I would have made that transition without developing my emotional intelligence. And so I hope you can hear some of the passion coming out of me, because I've lived my own life journey of this, all the privilege, but crippled on the inside. My voice was also like this. I couldn't even send an invoice to the biggest opportunity of my life, Sesh. And now I see this young lady, that's her role in Exco is to talk. That's her job around the boardroom table. And she does the same thing I was doing. No, I'll send the invoice later. And 3 months' time, she wants to share the idea, but then someone else has come up with it or whatever. Kensani, I also had the same problem. I'll totally disqualify myself. Guys, we can overcome these things. And I want to share with you some of the neuroscience. I'm realizing we're running out of time, so let me go quickly here. But communication, you can plot, empowered. Okay, we can. I just want to illustrate that these things that we want to see in our lives and in our work are rooted in the EQ competencies you saw on the right-hand side. And so my position has just become squarely that if we want to unlock these things, emotional intelligence is going to unlock it for us. By the way, you might know that LinkedIn is now showing that EQ is now the power skill, and it's a critical skill in all industries at all levels in every region of the world, is what the World Economic Forum is saying. But I want to share with you guys some of the neurological reality so that we can really understand how we can actually cause change in our brains, because that's what I want to excite you towards, that when you leave here today, you are able to, thanks Akona, the neuroscience, I love it too. I'm sorry, but this is going to be like only 3 minutes of neuroscience. Sorry about that. But I want you to understand that the problem lies physically in our brain. It's like we have weak muscles if we have struggle with some of the things I'm mentioning. And just like we can strengthen muscles, we can change the neurological wiring in our brain. So this is a neuron. This, by the way, you don't need to know anything about biology for the next 3 minutes. I'm going to tell you. This is a cell in the brain. It's called a neuron. That's where neuroscience, that's where what you hear on all the TED Talks, neuroscience, neuropsychology, it all comes from neurons in the brain. It's like a little wire, okay, that has signals that go down it. You can see that this says direction of the signal. So there's electrical impulses that come here, okay, down this wire. It's like an electric wire. The electrical impulse comes down to the end. You can see this is like a magnified part of this section over here. The electrical impulse comes in over here and it touches these little pods that have, these are called vesicles that have neurotransmitters in them. These are like little chemicals, okay? These chemicals, you sound like a messiah, Mark, and it's inspiring to hear. Thank you, Mululi. Especially, yeah. Mululi, I've just gone cold. Guys, I'm sorry to get emotional, but I don't know if you've seen on the chat pane, but Nkululi, let me tell you, the struggle I've had in my life with all the privilege of my skin color and my demographic, and I can only imagine, Nkululi, the journey that you've had. I'm telling you that it can change because it's changed for me. Sorry, guys, that I got emotional, but I'm desperate for you to hear this message. Let me get back to the, thanks for that, Nkululi. I haven't got emotional in a long time in a session like this. Okay, so there's electricity that comes down here, okay? It comes into contact with these vesicles, and depending on the frequency of the electricity, okay, that determines which of these vesicles gets pushed to the edge of this gap here between the two neurons. This, by the way, is the one neuron. This is the next one. And it bursts, it almost like pops the chemicals into this space here called the synaptic space. And it then gets received over here by these little things called receptor sites. So this is electricity that turns into chemicals that gets received at the receptor sites and then turns into electricity again. So it's electricity that turns into chemicals. And the question is, what determines the electrical frequency? Because if the electrical frequency determines the chemicals, then we have to ask ourselves the question, what determines the frequency? Because if you have if you can change the frequency, you change the chemicals. And the answer to that question is, it's our thoughts. It's what we think. If I think I am good enough, I have the courage, I have the capability, we're going to have the electrical frequency of good enough, and the chemicals of good enough will release. And guys, we know that feeling when we feel good enough for something. But if we are thinking worthless or ugly, or I'm a woman and so I'm not good enough, or I'm black and I'm not good enough, or my father and mother left me and I'm not good enough, we're going to have those thoughts, and we're going to then have the chemicals of not good enough. And guys, we know what that means. We start with withdrawing, don't we? And so this is happening in our brains. And the encouragement, the reason I want you to see this is because we can change these frequencies through certain very practical techniques. Like Akona is saying, self-talk comes into play big time. Absolutely. And there's techniques that you will do on Migro in this giveaway that commences giving away to you guys that will help you with some of the techniques to do this. But let me show you now. This is at the individual neuron level. I want to just zoom out a little bit to show you how it starts impacting on the rest of our lives. On the rest of our bodies. Now, this is zooming out. If you imagine that this is the pituitary gland in the brain, okay, the pituitary gland, I say here it's the cocktail from the pituitary gland. I like to think of the pituitary gland as the bartender of the brain. It makes the mix of chemicals that get released. Now, let's say, for example, that you have in your life experienced quite a lot of shame or anger. And guys, I've got to tell you, shame and anger are two of the most common emotions that I see in the people I work with. It might be you're a woman and you walk into a meeting and you see a man that represents someone that makes you feel shame. It might be that you walk into certain meetings and you interact with, in my case, a much older, physically bigger Afrikaans man. For me, that represents my first stepfather. That was the alcoholic. I start experiencing shame and anger, guys. And so if you've experienced shame and anger in your life, or you get triggered in a day because of shame and anger, something that happens, the pituitary gland releases that shame and anger as chemicals that comes down to the cells in your body. This is the DNA representing the cells in your body. And you'll see there's these little receptor sites that we looked at last time. I like to think of them as parking bays, the green things here, that receive the chemicals of shame and anger. When there is excess of shame or anger or racism or sexism or worthlessness or not good enough or whatever the thoughts are that you have, when there's an excess of those thoughts or chemicals now, the cells go through a process of upregulation. And what they start doing is they make more parking bays for shame or anger or racism or sexism or not good enough, because our bodies like to be in a state of equilibrium. It's called homeostasis. We like to be balanced chemically. And so we make more parking bays. And when we've made more parking bays for shame or anger or any of these things, the hypothalamus in our brain, the thermostat, it's like the temperature of the brain, says to the pituitary gland, it says, you know what? Send more shame and anger. And how do we get the chemical fix of shame and anger? We have to have the thoughts of shame and anger. And so do you know what we do? We start interpreting the world in a way that will allow us to feel shame or anger. I have seen people sitting around a boardroom table where somebody asks a question that's actually an insightful question, and they take offense and they become ashamed or angry. And it is because their brain is playing a game, giving them almost like a drug addiction, their chemical hit of shame or anger. We will interpret the world in a way that can allow us to feed our emotional addictions. And I want to say to you that this cycle over here is called the cycle of emotional addiction. And it is one that we can break out of. I have, over the last 10 years, started going on a process of breaking free of some of the shame and anger that I experienced towards bigger Afrikaans men. And now I'm able to interact with them in a way that doesn't trigger me. And I know that it can be the same with you. But the way that we do that is by rewiring the neural circuitries in the brain. And that's what Migro is going to help you to do. Now, let me just show you very quickly. Some people often ask me, Mark, but why do you say that emotion has such a big impact on innovation? I want to share with you this last aspect here, and then I want to stop for a moment and we can have a conversation, and I'll see if there's any more slides I can share with you as we have the conversation. I just want to show you very powerfully how emotion, because I've shared quite emotively around personal perspective, right? And long-term life story of, for myself, worthlessness, but, you know, Sesh brought up, racism in the country, imperialism, etc., okay? So I want to speak to just the momentary emotions we experience on a day-to-day basis or meeting-to-meeting basis, and show you how they might impact on innovation. So you can see how important emotional intelligence is for you moment by moment in your work. This is an experiment that was done by Barbara Fredrickson back in 2004. What she did was she wanted to see the impact of certain different kinds of emotion, ranging from more positive emotions like joy and contentment through neutral emotions to fear and anger. And what she did is she induced these emotions in clusters of people. She actually used university students. And so she would show certain video clips for the joy. She would show children playing and laughing, and a mother consoling a child, and puppies and that kind of thing to induce joy. Then she would show contentment. She would show a river flowing and someone sitting in a hammock, or that picture we saw earlier, you know, in Mauritius, you know, that background. Or neutral, it would be like a hammer, you know, just a cartoon of a hammer hitting a nail. Or fear, you know, there would be like a horror movie. Or anger, there would be racist slurs or you know, gender bias things people were saying to instill anger. She showed them these videos in 5 different clusters. So this was group number 1, group number 2, group number 3, all the way down to group number 5. And she gave them a sheet of paper that had 20 lines on it. Okay, 20 lines. And they had to write down the solutions that they could find to a current problem they were trying to solve in their life relationally. Okay, this is called your thought action repertoire. It is the repertoire of thoughts you think you can, of thoughts you can have around action you can take. Thought action repertoire. Okay, and what she did was she measured it. And guys, have a look at these. Have a look at what happened. Those that experienced joy were on average able to literally see more than double the amount of ideas. They were able to think of more than double the amount of ideas of those that experienced anger. And this became known as the broaden and build theory of positive emotion. If we are able to maintain a state of positive emotion, it broadens our visual perspective and it builds our resources. We are able to think better and do more. Whereas when we are constantly in a state of negative emotion, anger, frustration, resentment, irritation, etc., we literally are not able to see properly. And I want to put it to you that if you are running a business and it's a startup, or if you are coaching somebody and helping them, you need the perfect question to unlock them. Or if you are leading a group of people, guys, we need the most number of ideas in our perspective so we can choose from them. If all we can think about if we have an angry interaction with someone is punch them in the face or run away, that's not going to bode well for us in negotiations with either our employees or clients we're trying to serve. But if we can think of a whole lot more options that are available to us, guys, that's going to give us power. And so part of what emotional intelligence does is sorry, I clicked to the wrong slide there, is it enables us to maintain a balance between the emotional centers of the brain and the frontal lobes so that we can have maximum power in the things that we do. And that's part of the giveaway that Cometa is giving to each one of you today, is a 1-month free subscription to Migro. And Sam, I don't know if you perhaps are able to put that link in the chat pane. I see you sent me an email earlier saying that it wasn't working. I went to go check it out and it was working on my side. So guys, Sam is going to put a link in the chat pane. I think he said he might also email it to you.
Yeah, we're going to email it immediately after this session. But
okay, wonderful.
I can put it if you want as well.
Sam, that's up to you then, if they're all going to get it on email. It's just to say that Migro is going to be like an online gym to help you to start implementing certain techniques to strengthen the emotional intelligence muscles for you and for some of your employees, if that's what you want. But for now, I'd love to just stop there and see if we can stop for a couple of questions. Would love to open up for conversation, and I might share one or two other visuals as we go, depending on the questions that come. Please, if you ask a question, would you mind just putting your video on? I'd love to see who's asking, but also if for whatever reason you don't feel like that, maybe you're in your pajamas or it's not a good hair day or whatever it is on your side, then you're welcome to obviously keep your video off. So should we stop for a time of questions, guys? Or discussion, if you just want to make a few comments.
Mark, mine will be a sort of a comment on something which I've learned in my earlier days when I was still in corporate.
Thank you, Rapula.
Yeah, I used to have a boss or a line manager called Rob Shooter. I think he's currently in Europe. I'm not sure what he's doing in that environment because he used to be in MTN.
Okay.
Before he starts the meeting in the morning, he will say, some call it checkup or check-in. He won't say, please just be open and tell us where you are. And the reason why you were saying that is that I need to test or understand the state of mind so that in the process of a conversation, a person will know whether the child was bathed with water this morning or you have agreement with husband and boyfriend this morning, so that we should be in a position to understand when you respond. Where is your emotional status at the same time. So that has taught a lot of things when you enter in any conversation. Those are the things which triggers my conversation when I have a conversation with any person. I'm not sure whether does it fall out. I didn't do any psychology. Whether does it fall within the space of emotional intelligence, or it's part and parcel of saying, as a person when you grow, understand the environment, be mindful of the environment you are, so as to help you out to grow in this space. That's something I'll put in a picture at this moment.
Rapula, thanks so much for sharing that. I'd love to just show you where I would situate that in the cluster of emotional intelligence. I would situate that here in the space of empathy, that ability to literally understand that people have a reality of their own, and that the way that I interact with others is massively impacted by the other person's reality. And that's why emotional intelligence is part of managing myself, but also interacting with others most effectively. Thanks so much for that input. That's certainly where I would position it. Someone had their hand up, but now they've taken their hand down.
That's Boniwe, Mark, and then followed by George. I've posted the link in the chat so colleagues can copy before they leave. But we will also make sure that they get it per email.
Great. Yes, thanks, Sam. Okay, Boniwe.
Hi, I think from me
Boniwe.
on my hi everyone, and thank you, Mark, for the session. It's actually quite insightful, and I'm enjoying it. I think for me, it's just maybe more of a commentary is that, you know, EQ is actually quite important. It can actually make you or break you. And I think over the years and with different programs that I have been, one of the things that I've realized is that one needs to acknowledge who they are and their background and the damage that their background has done to them in terms of how they turned out to be, but also not allowing that to actually take over your life, right? So you need to acknowledge what happened and actually look at ways on how to and how to actually overcome that for you to be able to be the person that you want to be. I'm in human resources, and I have seen how some leaders have failed in their senior positions, not because they are not capable, because of the low emotional intelligence that they have, and them wanting to suppress the past, the past incidents or the past behaviors or what happened in their upbringing, and that normally then sets them back. So I think for me, it's know yourself as an individual, know what makes you who you are, and just try to craft a way on how to overcome that by using different tools such as this one to get you to where you want to be, because this can be a makeup or a breakup point for you if you don't invest into it.
Boniwe, you are absolutely right. I love your earrings, by the way. But I want to just share with you a couple of concepts here that might be helpful in your context. And just to add to what you're saying is, the question should be, how do we develop this? So I've like a preacher, someone said, I really appreciated that. But I've said it can change. I've said it's about rewiring your brain, but how? How do you develop it, right? And there's a few mistakes that get made in learning and development, and even in ourselves. I started with my introduction saying, it's not what you know about these things that matters. It's what you do. Remember that, okay? And so I'm telling you guys that today is not going to change anything for you, knowing about this stuff. Even those of you that have read a lot about emotional intelligence, guys, I'd been reading about this stuff for 10 years. It didn't change anything for me. Just like if you and I want to become physically fit, Buniwe, if we want these guys, okay, or maybe you want the guys down the bottom, you know, I don't know what you're aiming at, but if we want physical fitness, okay, and we just read about it, we both agree that's not going to make us fit. Hey, I mean, we both agree. So we know from Virgin Active and Planet Fitness and physical sport and whatever, that if we want to get our muscles strong, there's only one way to do that. We need to do exercises over time. The same is true of the neurons in our brain. They actually work, Buniwe, very similar to muscle fibers. In other words, the more you exercise them, the stronger they get. But neurologically, we talk about, as you know, neural pathways in the brain, okay? The principle is actually cells that fire together, wire together. And so if we start allowing ourselves to process thoughts in a certain way, we make those neurological pathways stronger and stronger. So it's exercises over time, or in the terms of psychology, techniques over time, okay? Now, the purpose for that is we need to be able to balance the emotional centers with the frontal lobe. And this is part of what many online learning solutions are not getting right, because they focus on knowledge. This new world pedagogy that's starting to emerge that you'll experience on Migro. In the old world, a pedagogy, by the way, those of you that are not familiar with the word, is just a learning methodology. It's the way that one learns, okay? In the old world, what would happen is you would start, sorry, let me go back here. You would start a training program, okay? You would go on like an EQ development program or leadership development program or whatever. At the start of it, there would be a big amount of impact quite quickly. Maybe like this session has had for you. Maybe for some of you, you're going, whoa, I didn't realize I could rewire my own self-worthlessness. You know, I didn't realize that. And you get to the end of it and there's this impact that's happened, right? But then time passes and there's this regression that happens back to the way that we were behaving. Now, from what we've looked at today, this is just emotional addiction playing back, right? We're going back to our normal old way of behaving because we want to feed our emotional addictions. So a learning methodology that just gives us knowledge will look like it has big impact initially, kind of like our New Year's resolutions do. We start a diet at the beginning of New Year or new exercise regime. We go for the first few weeks, then slowly we miss a day, then we're eating a hamburger, then we go here, and then we're back, you know, by February, March, April, we're back to where we were, okay? This is a regression curve, and we see this in a lot of online learning platforms and a lot of face-to-face learning in HR. What we've done at Migro and what you'll see more and more in the new world is that sustained development is what causes actual behavioral change. And so you'll see, guys, those of you that sign up on that link Sam sent to do Migro, you can only do one gym session per day over long periods of time, because what we want to see is slow incremental growth that causes sustained development, because what matters is rewiring the neural pathways. And that takes techniques over time. So you just prompted that thought for me. I hope you don't mind me sharing some of that, but that might help you also in making choices for yourself around the learning and development processes that you decide to go on. Yeah, I see there's some other questions here. Yeah, Sam, can you help me to facilitate?
Yeah, there's Pelani and then Kululi and then Advocate Pongana.
Oh, yeah, okay. Can I just pop in there because I had my end up?
Oh, yeah, sorry, George, Pelani, Kululi, and Advocate.
George, we disregard your hand because you and Mauritius there in the background. We want to be there.
I'm about to go back into my room, so. No, mine was really more of a comment, triggered by what I think this is a wonderful session. And Mark, and you and I are going to talk offline. So But what it triggered, last week we had a presentation. I had a presentation addressing a group of lawyers on an annual conference about where the world is going to. And we talked about 4IR, we talked about 5IR, and 4IR is the age of technology, etc. But what 5IR is saying is that, yes, you will have that huge component of technology, but the big element of 5IR is the personalization side.
Wow.
That is the people and machines.
Wow.
5IR says, if you don't have EQ, if you can't deal with people, then you are going to be more and more irrelevant. Because yesterday, when we hired graduates, whether into law firms, etc., we looked for the guys who had A+, and everything, because they could read a lot and regurgitate and stuff. But that's being taken over by AI. So contracts, everything, opinions, everything's going to be done by a machine.
Yeah.
But who is going to deal with the people?
Yeah.
That is where your EQ, you don't, so when you're recruiting tomorrow, you're recruiting a guy who's tech savvy, but if he doesn't meet the EQ side of things, and we read that it can be trained and developed, etc. If you don't develop that, then that person doesn't become relevant because technology is there to do everything else.
Yeah.
So for me, really, it's been quite a important session, this particular one. As I said, it was just a comment, but it's very, very impactful. Thank you very much.
I would love to share. Thank you so much for that, George. I would love to screen share again, if you don't mind. And Sam, while I find my slides, do you mind just sharing how we're doing for time? Because I see my time slot is up. We're a bit over time. There's a few questions.
Let's perhaps get the questions from Pelani and Mkhululi and Advocate, and then you can answer them all in once. But it's the last session. If people are still okay, I'm okay.
Okay. George, will you remind me, please? I'm going to take these questions first, as Sam is saying. Will you please remind me, just say 4 or 5 IR. If I forget, just type it in the chat pane. Okay.
Okay.
So whose question is next there, Sam?
As Pelani.
Hi, Pelani.
You're muted, Pelani.
But you're looking good. You're looking good, Pelani.
Thank you, Mark. A big thank you to yourself and Sam for the session. It's absolutely very enlightening. I just want to make a comment and then a question. And the comment is really to say thank you for the point that you shared about systemic and the system and the agent. I particularly liked where you said if we change or bring change to the agents at a larger scale, it's more likely to be sustainable and more likely to bring an effect than if we focus on the system. Because quite often, I think that's what we do. We focus on the culture of the organization, we focus on the leadership of the organization, and so on. But having said that, the cultures that sometimes we have in organizations and the kind of leadership that we have itself creates an environment whereby people fall into that learned helplessness. And I'm just trying to think about what would your suggestion be where, for example, we have got to change a culture of the organization, and you now try to think about the leader at the top has created a culture of non-appreciation, a culture of not empowering people, a culture of not being empathetic, etc. And now, sometimes what I find is we try to come up with changes through a number of programs. But you find the majority of the people have actually fallen into that learned helplessness. you know, they look at all the training that you do, and when you go past somebody during tea time, you hear them actually talking that, well, we are just here to hear these concepts. But as you know, in this organization, they just won't happen. So I would like to hear your suggestion, what it would be to kind of get people out of that learned helplessness, whereby sometimes the intervention that you bring is already branded a failure in the minds of people even before it has taken off. Thank you.
Pelani.
Right.
I would love to.
Thanks,
I would love to answer, but Sam definitely said take all the questions first. So let's hear from who's next, Sam.
It's the advocate, Ongani.
Okay, I thought it was Mkhululi. My question has been partly asked by the latter speaker. Maybe my comment would be then, thank you for sharing the issue on the impact of emotions in innovation. That study you showed, I mean, I've experienced that as a problem solver, where you engage people in different times of the day or in different times of the conflict. You find that when you engage them, when there is less conflict, they are more prone to come up with creative ideas as opposed when there's conflict. Thanks for confirmation. But the question was asked by the previous speaker. Thank you.
Right. Thank you. Mkhululi?
Okay, thank you, Sam. Mark, not to overwhelm you with a lot of questions, man. Mine is just to ask you, you spoke about balancing the frontal lobe and also to have a few gym sessions with your brain. My question is, what do you have a list perhaps of one of the things that we can do on a daily to try and move us to not having a bad day in a very long time, as your professor told you back some time back. So basically it's just without us having to go to a session, but on a daily basis. And is it a matter of trying to first find out what is wrong with you, then having gym sessions to address that, or they're just gym sessions that one can just engage on to just improve their overall well-being mentally?
Yeah.
Thank you, Mark.
Thank you. These are just such great questions, guys. I've actually just jotted down the way I interpreted them into the chat pane, just so that I can remember them, if you don't mind. Is there another one, Sam, before I answer?
No, you can answer them, Mark.
Okay, great. Thanks so much for these questions, guys. So let me just start at the top then with George's question in terms of the fifth industrial revolution, which I don't know too much about. I'm focused right now in the work I do on where we are, which is fourth industrial revolution. But I love what you're saying, George, about the fifth industrial revolution there. Just tell me if I'm sharing my screen, by the way, with you guys. Are you seeing my screen coming through?
Yes.
Okay. What I wanted to share with you, I've lost it now. Sorry, give me just a second here. I had the slides ready, but then I went off them. Shucks, guys. Sorry, let me just find the slides. There's a couple of visuals that I wanted to share with you that I think are just going to reinforce what George was saying in a way that I think will be quite helpful for us. For those of you that are perhaps not too in the conversation around the human capital shift and fourth industrial revolution. But this is what George was talking about, essentially. Many of you are familiar with these four different industrial revolutions. Now, I didn't know this until a little while ago, but each one of the industrial revolutions was created by a significant shift in a technology contribution. That's what caused the different industrial revolutions. So, for example, steam power led to mechanization and the looming weave, or these three kind of technological advancements led to massive shifts. The next one was electricity, which allowed mass production and production lines like the Ford assembly line in America, and that impacted on assembly lines. Third industrial revolution, automation and computers. This is, Apple and Microsoft, changing the way the world does business. And now, of course, we're into the fourth industrial revolution. And as George was saying, the fifth industrial revolution is coming. This had all to do with the technological contribution. But guys, you and I and our staff are not technology. We are human. That's what George was saying. And so there's been an interesting skill shift that has happened between the third industrial revolution and the fourth industrial revolution. And I think it's vital for us to see and know on the back of this talk. The one is, and this is, George, I mean, this is what you were saying, is that in the past, it used to all be about technical skill. Do you have the academic credentials? Do you have this, you know, what is your technical prowess? And that is going to literally dictate your seniority in the business, right? Let's think of an accountant. If you're a CA, well, you're going to be at the top of the business because you know how technically accounting works, right? Now, guys, this is not a perfect example. This is an overgeneralization. So please forgive me if anyone's getting insulted because you have done a lot of academic training. I have also, and I've got a lot of respect for that. But I'm just talking about how in the third industrial revolution, this was the beginning and the end of the conversation. If you had a PhD, you were straight into the top positions, right? But now, what's happened slowly between Industry 3.0 and Industry 4.0 is that the need for technical skill has somewhat diminished because of things like artificial intelligence or Google or robotics. And the thing that describes this the most for me is the accounting platform Xero. You might use Sage or Softline or whatever you use. We use Xero, Xero. I always laugh in South Africa because I think we should pronounce it Xero, you know. But anyway, Xero. And guys, we don't even need an internal accountant in Migro. We don't even need the technical skill of accounting because it's all automated through, of course, we're an online product, so it's a bit different, but it's all automated. So the need for the technical skill of accounting in our business is not such a high need. We don't need a CA in our business to be successful because it's being carried by the technology, right? That's just an example. But something else that's shifted is in Industry 3.0, there wasn't very much of a need for, as George was saying, the social and emotional competencies. And here we can think of Steve Jobs. Steve Jobs, he didn't really care how people felt about working with him. And what happened in the end? He became a bit of a tyrant, didn't he? In Apple, he got thrown out ultimately because he was just intolerable to work with, okay? And slowly, I don't know if you noticed, but when he came back, sorry, I've mentioned Steve Jobs twice, guys. I've just, you know, recently been watching again some of the stuff from his life. But did you notice that when he came back, his focus was much more communal in the way and relational in the way he approached things? Because now in Industry 4.0, the things that give people power in the organization are these social and emotional competencies, like George was saying. Are you able to function in your leadership role? Are you able to produce an environment of creativity, innovation? Are you able to, you know, part of Advocate's question, and that second question was about organizational culture. Are you able to build an environment where people can thrive? That's the reality. And guys, you know what blows my mind about this, George? I hope this blows your mind too. I often use this visual to describe the reality, which is that we need to be people that fundamentally approach the world through a paradigm, and I think this is just emotional intelligence, but the paradigm is this: umuntu, ngumuntu, ngabantu. That is the paradigm of emotional intelligence. And the problem is, and I hope I don't insult anybody here, but there are many leaders that I interact with that come from the cultural background of umuntu, ngumuntu, ngabantu. But they don't, it's here. It's here. They know about it, but it's not coming out here in the behaviors. And what it's, and so I would say that there's a low emotional intelligence in that context. And so what we need is we need the ability to manage ourselves, and that is emotional intelligence, but to understand that we are who we are in the context of the communal, in the context of the people that we work with. And that is also emotional intelligence. That leader that you mentioned earlier that just bothers enough to say, guys, how are you doing today? What did you show up with today? to know that about your team changes the way surely you interact with people. It changes the kind of pressure you can put on people. It changes the nature of the goals that you can set, you know. So that was my thought just to the IR 3.0 stuff. Akona saying, I find that with leaders and bosses, ego plays a bigger role than using EQ to motivate towards better performance. Do you know what I've found, Akona? I can't agree with you more. This ego, people call it ego. I would, in the way I understand ego, I would call it insecurity. And that would fit in with self-perception. This person actually probably doesn't feel good enough. And usually you see two types of behaviors. Number one, the person needs to push themselves up. So they will try and show you all of the good things they do, you know, or they'll try and take credit for what other people have done. Okay. They want to look shiny because actually they feel so insufficient on the inside. That's one way I've seen it played out. The other way I've seen it played out is that people will try and push other people down, because if I can push somebody else down, then at least I am higher than they are. You know what I'm saying? And so there will be this politics going on to try and undermine other people, or there will be gossip happening so that I can just push people down, or there will be negative comments about people. Guys, all of this stuff, make no mistake, lies in the realm of low emotional intelligence. And it comes out of a place of insufficiency. By Rapula. Okay, so that's for the one question, which was what kind of, oh, no, sorry, the five industrial revolution and the people focus. George, I think you're absolutely right. I just wanted to share that I think there's been this inverse reality happening where the people that have high emotional intelligence are going to be the dominant players, either as leaders or as employees into the future. Then there was a question here about changing the culture from the top. Guys, I have to acknowledge that this is very difficult. This is very difficult, and sometimes it might not be possible. If there is somebody at the top of an organization or perhaps a leadership team that is so toxic that they actually don't want it any other way. And so I don't want to try and share some profound insights or some nice little colorful pictures on a slide to pretend like that's not going to be helpful. What I do want to say is that I have noticed in my experience with Migro, and let me just share a visual to support this, and you guys will see this as you interact with Migro a little bit. Is that you know, I don't know if you guys know, but Sam is partnering with Migro. He's using it as part of his coaching work, and so if you want to find out any more, you can just go straight to Sam, guys. He can get you hooked up totally with some of what we've been sharing today. But let me show you quickly what becomes possible with technology like Migro. In the past, your question would lie here. And the question would be, how do we change the organizational culture if only sporadic people in the organization have emotional intelligence? So these little blue dots indicate a few people through the organization. This is obviously the top of the organization. This is the bottom of the organization. Forgive me that I'm showing a bureaucratic structure, but it's just to identify with something. And usually what we've tried to do in the past to shift organizational culture is we focus more on the senior managers and leaders. We usually call it leadership development, or executive education or development, executive coaching. You know, all of this fits into this realm. And then we hope that the senior guys are going to change enough that their behavior will trickle down through the organization, right? That's what we hope for. Because of course, doing some of this level of stuff, it costs so much per person that you can't possibly do it for all the lower levels of the organization. It's just unaffordable, okay? Are you familiar with this, guys? Can you just let me know in the chat pane if this is something that you are familiar with? Are you seeing the slides, by the way? Sorry, I didn't ask if I'm sharing. Okay. I think this is an old and no longer relevant way of causing change in an organization, because it puts too much pressure on the few senior people to change and doesn't take into account their portfolios. Because when they come back from whatever behavioral change management process that happens, they don't have more time to go around the organization implementing change, quite frankly. The only time they have left is to get to their emails as quickly as possible, get to their diary, their next meeting that is chock-a-block full, and to try and make it to Friday. That's frankly, and their family and their kids and whatever they need to do. These guys are also struggling. And so what we've done with Micro is we've found a way to leverage technology to simultaneously across the organization do a change management process that scales emotional intelligence from top to bottom, so that you can start changing either whole companies or whole departments or whole teams. You will see if you go on the Micro website, it's developing the emotional intelligence of teams. And this is part of why I think Sam has chosen to start using it as a tool in some of the coaching work that he does. So just bear that in mind, is that I think technology has made a methodology possible now that was not possible before. And we are starting to see now that even if some of the senior leaders don't change and they stay toxic, there's enough people through the organization whose emotional intelligence shifts that the culture slowly starts to change. And one of two things happens. Either a lot of pressure gets put on the senior leaders so they start changing incrementally, or they become quite isolated and then potentially eventually start shifting. Or what we see is that people in the organization are emboldened to actually move on from the organization. Because some companies, people actually need to leave, even in the context of South Africa, because it's actually more damaging to them than unemployment. You know, and that's what we're seeing in the great.
I think the other point, Mark, is that this becomes, it almost like it exposes what they didn't know of self, so much so that it's very difficult to focus on the organization, your department, the team, but yourself. You have it really makes you to work on yourself, because it puts things very much naked for you to see. And then you start to realize that actually the problem is with me. And in many cases, you don't even have to go and tell anybody. You will just start doing the work yourself, because as you do these exercises, you actually start feeling even better yourself. So that's what I will add to that, that in many cases they wouldn't leave, because the energy that is actually being spread by the people who are participating in the exercise itself does the cleaning, you know. So that's just a comment I will want to make.
So let me see, I see your hands up, but I just want to, thank you, Sam. And by the way, now I see Sesh also put a comment here just about the academic stuff. Thanks for that, Sesh. But just to comment to Advocate Bongani, very familiar with the approach to change. Something interesting that's coming out now through technology, and this is, I think, what Sam is alluding to, is that the data that becomes possible means that you can literally look at everybody in the organization and the psychosocial factors. And like we look at financial statements in the business to look at the finances, we can look at, for example, on Micro, the data reporting for the psychosocial factors in the business. And it becomes very difficult for a CEO amidst his executive team to see that he is the outlier and that it is where he is involved that things are struggling, because the data is now there to show it. So that's just one comment. I quickly just want to, Sam, touch on some of the techniques just to answer that third question. Hello. And then I think I'd love to leave it in your hands because we're going quite far over time now. Let me just share just some examples. I think the third question was about certain techniques that I'm talking about. In other words, what are these actual exercises that I'm talking about? Let me just give you an example of some of them, but guys, you'll be able to get access to all of these on Micro. So I'm going to leave the specifics of them and the research about them for what you'll learn in that Micro subscription. But let me just give you an example of them just in advance. There is quite a well-known technique. I can't believe it's such a well-established technique, because it's literally called the ABCDE technique. It's from a psychologist, Albert Ellis. It's from a field of psychology called rational emotive behavioral therapy. Comes out of the domain of cognitive behavioral therapy. Cognitive meaning cognition, like thought, and behavior, obviously, what we do. So it's a way of reframing our thinking. And what he created was a way of structuring our thoughts in something a little bit like a balance sheet, and using it to dispute certain irrational beliefs that we may have. And the fundamental principle of this is the technique, is as we learn what activators are, and an activator is a trigger or any event that happens that causes negative emotion. It might be for you, it might be something that I've said in this webinar, guys. It might have been as I turned my video on and you saw, oh, shucks, this guy Mark's a white guy, a white male. that might trigger you. Or you know, it might be that someone says something in a board meeting and you take offense, okay? Whatever causes negative emotion is the activator. And our problem is that we immediately think that what the activator causes is the consequence, anger or resentment or insecurity or frustration or whatever. We link the activator with the consequence, okay? But the theory is it is not the consequence that is caused by the activator. The consequence is caused by our beliefs. And so what we have to do is not to try and change the consequence or the activator, because guys, we are always going to be offended. We live in the world with other humans, and humans are unfortunately people that make mistakes or are ignorant or whatever it is. But as we learn to dispute, and there's specific techniques and ways of disputing our irrational beliefs, it allows us to then have effective behaviors and beliefs. So this ABCDE technique is a way of framing one's thinking as soon as one becomes activated through negative emotions. And this is a very powerful thing. I used to struggle, by the way, with certain questions that people would ask in meetings. It would make me angry. It would shut down my thinking. And I was able to reframe that by disputing my irrational belief. And it allows me now to be very compassionate and empathetic when people ask questions that in my mind, they should have been prepared for in a meeting. So that's just an example. Another technique has got to do with watching your ratio. If you are struggling with mood, by the way, if you struggle a little bit with depression, as I have done in my life, and I don't mean now clinical depression, that's a slightly different conversation. I mean, your mood is sometimes quite melancholic, okay? You struggle to feel yay about life, okay? There's a lot of research that you'll learn about on Micro that shows that if you can keep your positive thoughts versus negative thoughts to a 3 positives to 1 negative ratio, that leads to an emotional state of positive emotion. And so what this means is we need to use certain techniques to allow us to think 3 positive things for every 1 negative things. There's a few ways that you can do that. There's a technique called 3 good things, where you write down, literally at the end of the day, you write down 3 good things that have happened in your day, and then you start describing why they might have happened. So my wife made me breakfast the other morning. I couldn't believe it, guys, because I usually make breakfast. We've got a little 1-year-old in our house. She made me breakfast. That would be a good thing. Why did that happen? It happened because we're still married. We've only been married 8 years, but we're still married. There are so many people whose marriages have fallen apart for all sorts of reasons. So I'm grateful that I've got a marriage. We still care about each other, even though we're exhausted from a 1-year-old. She cares so much about me that amidst her exhaustion, she's just finished breastfeeding. She was willing to get up and make me breakfast. She cares enough about the work pressure that I'm under at the moment that she bought me breakfast in bed. In what world, guys, do I get breakfast in bed, you know, with a 1-year-old? So this 3 good things allows us to expand what we see in our lives and deepens the depth of gratitude that we have in our lives. And there's amazing research that you'll see on Migro that will show you the kind of neurological rewiring that this does and how this is powerful enough of a technique to actually work on people that are even struggling with clinical depression. And then there's another technique, giving praise, catching people doing something right and then telling them what they did that was right. This is more in an organizational context, but telling them what they did that was right, why it is important to the company, stopping for a moment of silence, and then encouraging them to repeat that performance. As you start catching people doing something right and speaking it out, you start changing the way you influence people from being critical to being motivational. And it can radically start changing the way we view our employees and we interact with them. So that's just a sample of some of the techniques that I'm talking about that start rewiring the neural pathways. They're as simple as doing push-ups, but they're as powerful for developing the muscles as just repeating the same exercise over and over again. So that's my answer to those 3 questions. Sam, let me hand over to you maybe to end us off for the day.
Thank you very much, Mark. My technique that I love most is the 3 good things and the 3 to 5 strengths that you reflect on a daily basis. It is, at first I struggled with it, but today I look forward to mention the 3 good things when I do my droplets every night before I go to bed for 10 minutes. So that's really beautiful. Advocate, do you have one quick question or quick remark? Otherwise we can bring it to closure. Yes, Advocate? Bongani?
No, I was clapping hands.
Oh, okay, sorry. I didn't understand the language. I thought you were raising your hand. Okay, thank you so much. Please remember to copy the link. I put it in the chat for your free 1-month experience of the platform. I've taken the names of everybody that has attended. We will, on top of that extra, send it per email. And we look forward to hear what your experience was. Mark, this has been extremely powerful. You know, you wrap it up so well. We started first thing in the morning with the Contribution Compass by Contribution Compass South Africa, Karen. We shared our natural energies with us. And then we had the colleagues from India, Auckland, sharing with us the organizational network analysis, which really speaks very closely to some of the things you raised. Then we had the directorship insights from Roger Hitchcock, which was also quite very empowering. And then, of course, your session, which for me, I liken this session to be an opportunity to look at ourselves as leaders. I mean, as that self-awareness is really about investing on emotional capacity for you to be able to lead. And of course, the fact that we could also give you the opportunity to just experience how this helpful is and it's powerful. There's a micro app you can just put on your phone. You don't have to be rushing to your laptop as long as you have connection wherever you are. But it's 10 minutes of your time every night, like going to gym, really doing those droplets. Mark, I don't know whether the link starts them with the boot camp or they go straight into a module.
Yeah, it'll start them with boot camp. They'll be able to do a psychometric assessment, an EQ assessment in the beginning, and then they'll be able to start the actual daily gym sessions or droplets, as we call them, exactly as you've said, Sam.
Beautiful. Thanks for reminding me about that 360-degree evaluation. Some of the colleagues here have done my 360-degree evaluation. I forgot to thank them, and I can tell you, I was amazed when I look at those self-expression, self-awareness and decision-making, stress management, how I perceived myself and how their graph versus my graph, I'm really now working on the gaps. I had a very low perception of myself on some of those topics, and they've helped me to really actually get motivated to realize that there are certain things I didn't know about myself that my colleagues here have helped me do it. So that's really powerful. And then, of course, Mark, I said before, we are a community. It's not like we have spoken to colleagues here and then we are going to disappear. This is the work in progress, and we will want to know that the colleagues are getting value from this for themselves and for their companies. Most of the people here are coaches. We have Janae here. Janae, I acknowledged her in the morning. She woke up at 5 o'clock in the US to be with us in the previous session, and she's still here.
Hi, Janae.
Janae is based in New Jersey in the US, and she's one of our partners in many things. Thanks, Janae. You are an OD specialist. She's a member of the International OD organization. What do you call it again, Janae, for those who might be interested from HR point of view?
Sure. I am a member of the International Organization Development Association, that's IODA. You can find them online at ioda.org, or I'll put put them in the chat. And then also internationally, but based here in the United States, is the Organization Development Network. Many tools and resources through both of those organizations, and you can connect with OD professionals worldwide in that way.
Thank you very
Wonderful.
much. Great stuff. Yeah, thank you very much, colleagues. I really appreciate it. This was our monthly Lekgotla, but this one was specifically dedicated to the Global Entrepreneurship Week, which is ending very soon. And every year in November, we do this. And that's why we were focusing on entrepreneurs, entrepreneurship, and business. We look forward to interact further, and keep well, do your emotional intelligence exercises. I will give you the link to all the videos so that you can review, but we will also post them on our LinkedIn and social media platforms for the bigger audience and network. Thank you very much. Take care. Much appreciated.